Hey guys, long time no see. Since the last time you saw me, I got a new haircut, I finished my first year of college. I've also recently been getting heavily into the band known as Iron Maiden. Now this is a band I've known about most of my life. I've just never really investigated them. I've been a fan of their most, biggest hits like The Trooper and Number of the Beast, but recently I've realized that I've never listened to an entire Iron Maiden album. So I've been listening through their discography and I've realized that this is one of the greatest bands of all time. When I listened to their album Power Slave, I was like, oh, holy crap, it blew my mind so much that I went to the store to buy it. And I don't buy music a whole lot anymore because of streaming services like Spotify. But when I heard their album Power Slave, I loved it so much that I went to the store to buy it just to say that I owned a copy of it. That's how much I loved that album. And I loved it so much that I was going to make my first video in a long time talking about how much I loved it. But then I realized that my audience wouldn't be very receptive to it. I'm a guy who listens to all kinds of metal, no matter, what year it was made in. But I've realized that my audience tends to lean more towards modern metal, and I wasn't sure if they would be receptive to a video about Iron Maiden or not. And this got me to thinking about the bigger picture, which is people who only listen to metal from certain eras. On one side, you have the people who only listen to the classic metal bands of the 70s and 80s, and that's their definition of metal. All the newer bands either aren't metal to these people or they just aren't good. They're not as good as the bands who started the genre. Then on the other side, you have people who only listen to newer metal, and they think that old metal is irrelevant, that it's not as good as newer metal, it's not as heavy, it's not as brutal. These old classic bands like Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden just aren't metal enough for these guys. And as someone who listens to both types of metal, classic and modern, I find this really, really ridiculous. If you only listen to classic metal, I've got news for you. You're missing out. You are missing out on a ton of great bands that have just as much or more talent than the old classic bands just because they're new. There's a ton of awesome bands that you're not giving a shot to just because they didn't come out in the 70s and 80s. And if you listen to only modern metal, then I've got news for you. You're missing out big time, man. Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer. These are the bands that started metal as we know it today. Everything that you listen to has been influenced by these bands in some way. The bands that you enjoy today would not be around if not for the success and widespread influence of early metal bands that paved the way for the other bands to come. I think the worst part about all this is that when we start labeling classic and modern metal as things that we inherently dislike, we look about as dumb as the people who don't listen to metal just because it's metal, when in reality they haven't listened to a metal song in their entire life. It's the same way with classic and modern metalheads. In my experience, people who only listen to classic metal haven't listened to very much modern metal at all. They're stuck in the good old days when metal was good and didn't have all that screaming crap in it. Metalheads who don't listen to classic metal only listen to modern metal, and again, in my experience, usually haven't listened to any classic metal, or at least haven't listened to it in the right mindset enough to appreciate it. They think that those old bands are irrelevant. They're not as metal as the new bands, despite those bands having established the genre in the first place. I think both these groups just need to step outside of their comfort zones and look at metal in the bigger picture. Since its inception, metal has been a growing and evolving genre, which means that different bands from different eras are going to sound inherently different, but that doesn't make one more or less good or talented than the other. Sure, the classic bands often aren't as brutal or as experimental or as heavy, though that's debatable, as modern bands, but when you go into it with the mindset that back in the day, this was the heaviest, craziest stuff out there, you really start to appreciate it more for what it is. Modern bands can be a far cry from the classic bands that came before them. But once you give them an honest try, you find that they're only building upon the foundation that was laid there by their forefathers. And if screaming is a problem for you, first off, you'll get over that. And second off, there are plenty of modern metal bands that have little or no screaming in them. You just have to look. The bottom line for both of these groups is this. Once you get rid of your preconceived notions about what metal is supposed to sound like, you into a whole new era of metal that you're totally unfamiliar with. And because of that, you can rediscover why you loved metal in the first place. When I got into metal, I only listened to, the more modern bands. But once I really started to go back and try to appreciate these old classic bands, I reinvigorated my love for metal. And because of that, I appreciate the genre more now as a whole. And I think it can work for people for both ways. So if you're one of those oldies that only listens to classic metal from the good old days, then go check out modern bands. And this time, really give them an honest try. Search and find a modern band that you like, because I guarantee you there's one out there. There's a band out there with all the elements of metal that you love, plus more. Just because a band is different and experiments with the genre in a new, crazy way doesn't make it inherently bad. Experimentation with music is how metal came about in the first place, so how can we expect the genre to grow and evolve without further experimentation? When you realize that these bands are really only trying to improve upon what's already there and trying to create their own style, I think you'll end up enjoying them. If you think that classic metal is lame or not heavy enough, go give bands like Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath an honest try, knowing that this stuff is where it all started. All the solos, all the breakdowns, all the guitar riffs, and all the vocals screaming or clean that we enjoy in metal today were brought on by these guys. Go into it knowing that back in the day, this was the craziest, heaviest music that you could get your hands on. This was heavy metal. When you go into it with that mindset, I think you'll really find something that reinvigorates your love for the genre. That's all I've got for this video, guys. I know it's been a while since I, came out and did a video. It's been a really long time. It's been like September of last year or something like that. But I felt like this was just a really important issue that I wanted to address because, I know people on both sides of the spectrum, people who listen to only classic metal and people who only listen to modern metal, and I just feel like it's ridiculous. They need to just be a little bit more open-minded about the heavy metal that they listen to, let alone music in general, but you get the point. So anyways, hopefully I can, do another video soonish. I don't know. I'm not going to give you a date. I'm not going to give you a topic. I don't want to get your hopes up. So until next time, as always, you guys just keep it metal.